It's me again, Fyree TSG from Nintendo Realm and Twitter and Facebook and other sites over the past 4 years or so. If you're watching this, you probably know me, and if you don't know me and you're watching this, hi, don't hate me. This is the third video blog, 3 straight days, video blog per. I'm bored. We don't have satellite, so I have other things I have to do to kill time, and this will be one of them for a while, probably. This is the third discussion. The last two are the video game wars of the 90s, my era of gaming I grew up in. Then expanding from that was arcade games from my era and just discussing those. That was a long one, but I had a lot to say. This is going to be the third one. I'm thinking what it probably going to be. I think it's just expanding from my previous two. Like the companies, the gaming companies, the publishers, third-party, first-party game makers who survived the 90s, I guess, who came out of the 90s on top and who plummeted. The first one that comes to my mind when I think of now defunct video game companies is probably Midway. If you grew up, playing games at all in the 90s or in the first half of the 21st century, first half, 2000 to like 04 or 05 when they were still a big name, Midway was like the king of arcade games for seemingly ever. They were the company who gave us Mortal Kombat, who gave us the NBA Jam series, who gave us all the really good sports games, NBA Jam and NBA Hang Time, and NBA Showtime, which is another really good arcade game, like the NBC basketball arcade game. And then they were the company who, back in the 80s, were licensed to bring over all the Namco's games, Pac-Man, Galaga, etc. They were huge, and then they gave us like the Cruisin' USA, the Cruisin' Racing games, which their last game was the cruising game for Wii, and then like a year or so later they went under, like '09 I think is when they went under, and ended their lifespan. And luckily, well, they gave us Mortal Kombat, and luckily Warner Bros. Picked them up, and they still made them. And if you're watching current gaming news, the latest Mortal Kombat game available has broken the franchise record for most has sold 3 million copies, making it the best-selling game in Mortal Kombat history, which is impressive, especially for a franchise that most people thought was going to go the way of Midway and never be heard from and just be gone. I mean, couple other Midway series I think are still owned by other companies, but it's not the same. Another company that recently went under was Acclaim. They were the company who brought a lot of Midway's games to the home console. They did the NBA Jam and the Mortal Kombat games, the Sega versions, the Super Nintendo versions of those. They've been gone for like a year or so now too, and I didn't even know that until early in the year. I'm like, wow, Acclaim is gone. I mean, so 2 big companies, Midway and Acclaim, both key parts of the arcade era and the video game war era of the 90s, and even up until recently are both gone. Other companies, Sega, I mean, that's probably the one that was hit the hardest by the fallout of the console wars and what Sony did, how big of an impact Sony made with their PlayStation in the mid-90s. Because Sega was on top of it. It was Sega and Nintendo. And Sega never really got out of that, and they pretty much have been where they've been for the past, 10 years or so since the fall of the Dreamcast. Other companies, companies that are still around and still active, Activision, huge game company in the 80s. They gave us Pitfall, and they gave us the Tony Hawk series, and for the PlayStation era and 64 and stuff like that, and they still do games. EA Sports, well, EA wasn't, they didn't do much in the 90s. They were a smaller company, and their only really big series of the 90s was Madden, which is still the longest running franchise in sporting game history, and probably one of the longest running franchises in gaming history for that matter. It's been going on for 22, 23 years, most of my lifetime. Pretty much since I started playing games, Madden's been a factor in the gaming market. Capcom, huge company, gave me one of my favorite games, Captain Commando, which is a kick-ass arcade game, and they gave us, obviously, they've had probably 3 of the most successful franchises in each of the last 3 decades or so. Mega Man's in the 80s to early 90s, Street Fighters in the early 90s. They still now obviously, and then Resident Evils from the mid 90s on, and other games as well. But those are definitely the 3 biggest. Konami, another big one. They gave us all the Ninja Turtle games in the 90s. Turtles in Time, Turtles arcade game, the ones for like Manhattan Project, and they gave it. I mean, they still make decent games, but I mean, the '90s was definitely a lot of the companies who made games in the '90s, that was their heyday. I mean, thank God a lot of them are still around, but those that aren't, aren't, and that's really sad. Um, I can't think of many other good arcade publishers or good publishers in the '90s that are still around. Well, Hudson, in a part, because they're Konami owned now, I believe. Um, Jalico was good. They made a bunch of good sports games, the bases loaded games and stuff like that. I still have Goal for the Super Nintendo, and that was a Jalico game. That was my first game I got for my Super Nintendo before I even opened it. So that was a nice early hint present back in like '93 or whenever when I got my Super Nintendo, my original one. Well, Nintendo was a good arcade game maker back in the day, but once the NES hit, that was pretty much all they needed. I can't really think of many others, so I'm gonna bridge the gap, and I'm gonna go. I think I'll do some of my favorite. No, did I do my favorite arcade games? I probably did. I forgot. This is on video, so enjoy this part when you're watching it. I'm gonna go to some of my favorite games of all time. I think I'll do my top 5 old school games. If you know me, you know that I'm a Tetris freak. That if it came down to choosing between any one game to play for the rest of my life, it would be Tetris. Preferably the NES or the Game Boy versions. Now I have both of those, but if I were ever to find the other NES Tetris, the one made by Tengen, which is probably one of the rarest games for the system, I'd buy in a heartbeat because it's just so rare. I think I might do that. Yeah. If you know your history, you'll know Atari, and you know that Atari was the thing up until the NES. Really, that was pretty much it. And that Atari and Nintendo collaborated because a lot of the early Nintendo games, Donkey Kong and a few others, were ported to the Atari. Um, but then in the early '90s, when the NES was racking up sales, Atari was pretty much gone. The Atari console line was pretty much a non-factor before Atari was ultimately bought up by Hasbro and then turned into a third-party developer, and has pretty much been a non-factor for the past decade or so. I mean, I think they had games a decade or so ago, like third-party games, but anyways, Atari was the thing. Nintendo took over their glory, and then in the early '90s, Atari came back, releasing games under the Tengen brand. If you have any black cartridges for NES, they're Tengen. And Nintendo had a problem with that, and this was like the first of their legal battles where Nintendo didn't want other companies making basically unauthorized games for their console, and so they sued Tengen. And I think that was Nintendo's first victory, or maybe Tengen won that. Either way, the ultimate result of that was Nintendo stopped, legally made it so made a set law under themselves that no other company, no unauthorized games or products, no unauthorized games could be made for their systems without the Nintendo stamp, the seal of quality. But back to Tetris. If I could find a copy of the Tengen version for NES, I'd buy it in a heartbeat. Tetris is my favorite game of all time. Second favorite game is a toss-up. I do 2A, 2B in this: Mario World and Mario Bros. 3. Mario World would be slightly ahead because it's far easier for me, and it's the only game that, it was the first Mario game I ever beat. Mario 3, though, there will always be a spot in my heart for Mario 3 because it gave us flying, and it gave me my 3 favorite Mario power-ups of all time: Tanuki, Frog, and Sledgehammer. And Raccoon. The confusion there: Raccoon is just the ears and the tail. Tanuki is the full suit. It's the full raccoon suit. I'm not going to get into the Tanuki mythology thing. It's really cool. Look it up on Wikipedia, or link it from like the Animal Crossing wiki, because the whole Tom Nook is a Tanuki thing. Mario World, Mario 3, so that'd be 1, 2, and 2B. So I think I'll just go to 4, which would probably be, if we're going to go old school, I'm going to say cartridges only. But I'm going to have to go Mario Kart 64 as my number 5 game. You know the hint, these are all Nintendos. Mario Kart 64, just because that was by far the best Mario Kart in my opinion, and that's the only Mario Kart that I could just pick up and play and not even worry about losing. I like the other Mario Karts that I played. Super Mario Kart, the original, was still awesome. I still love it. It's just really hard. Mario Kart Double Dash, boring. Mario Kart 64, the best console Mario Kart. Because it gave us battle mode. It gave us a triple red shell, the spiny shell. And if you see on my YouTube channel the Mario Kart 64 videos I posted, that's further proof why I love it, because there's some really good game sharks for it when you have the infinite red shell barrier code, which is just like sideswipe hit. Like, you don't lose. I mean, or hard to lose, or you're certainly not gonna get knocked out of the race easily. So that would be I go into that maybe later in another video. But Mario Kart 64 is definitely number 4. Number 5, I have to do another Mario game, and that would be Super Mario Land 2, 6 Golden Coins for Game Boy, which is the first Game Boy game I ever owned, first Game Boy game I ever beat, and still the best Game Boy game that isn't Tetris, in my opinion. Because it gave us, it was Wario's debut game. Mario had a new rival, and it was Wario. You play in Mario Land, so he has his own kingdom, which is awesome. Mario Land 1 is good, but Mario Land 2 takes everything to a whole new level. Mario Land 1 is easy. Mario Land 2 is fairly difficult in a few levels, especially when you're fighting Wario. Thank God if you know when you're at the file select menu when you start the game, press the select button for easy mode. That helps so much. Mario Land 2 gave us Bunny Mario, which is the most unheard of power-up, I think, in the Mario franchise, because nobody knows Bunny Mario unless you played Mario Land 2 or you've seen the pictures. And it had really good levels, really fun levels. You played 6 zones, and you had to fight. You had to get the coin, fight each sub boss, and get the coins. And it's just a very unique Mario game. It's not as unique as Mario Land 1, or certainly not as unique as Super Mario Bros. 2, the US version. There's a whole nother video. But Mario Land 2 would definitely be I think that would sum up my top 5. But if I were to call that 4, including the two number 2s, Mario World and Mario 3, I'll do a supplementary game, quote, 5th game. That's tough. It probably wouldn't be Mario if we're sticking with the old school era. I think it would probably be rather Turtles in Time for the Super Nintendo, or Cruis'n Exotica for the Nintendo 64. I know I'm sticking with Nintendo. I'm such Nintendo biased here, but that's what I grew up playing. I grew up playing Nintendo, and I always play Nintendo. I could go another series, another franchise, another console for that matter, but I think I go Cruis'n Exotica because it was the best racing game that wasn't Mario Kart for me. Because I loved the first 2 Cruis'n games, but Cruis'n Exotica had so much more, such the better courses. If you played the game, you will probably agree that the best course in the game is Las Vegas, the second best is Atlantis, but they're all really good. Just had good cars. The arcade version was so much better. If you ever find an arcade version of any of the Cruis'n games, play them. Cruis'n USA is probably the most boring, because it just gets really, really redundant. Cruis'n World, got my world screwed up there. Cruis'n World is really good. The arcade version is probably the best of any of them, because in the Germany course, when you're driving a Hummer or a big truck and you do the inside view, you can smash through the cows and they splatter in the windshield, which is hilarious. But Cruis'n Exotica is my favorite, just because I love that game for N64. I got that early in the year, and I couldn't put it down because it's just that awesome game. There's so much to do in it. So that would sum up that. I think that's a good video blog. If you want to hear more, I'll probably do another video blog right after I do this one. I don't know what that'll be about, but stay tuned.